Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the planning for the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. My name is Brenda Corona. On behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs Group, we welcome you to this informational session in which we will be discussing the April 8th solar eclipse with our forecasting team. We do have a few folks on panelists here today. We have Jessica Stewart, our senior energy meteorologist. We have Zach, our forecast model analyst, and we have a few folks here in the room. Elijah, our power systems forecast specialist, and Amber Motley, our director for short-term forecasting, and Rebecca, well, you're like the lead short-term forecasting the manager. Yes, congratulations on that. So we do have a few folks here too. And then we also have Brian Murray, who's from our director and operations. So he will also be chiming in. As a few housekeeping reminders today, this call is being recorded for informational convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We do encourage comments and questions through chat and verbal. We will go over those right now and how to ask a question. Just press #2 on your device for audio only. And if you're logged in through WebEx, just press the raise hand icon located in the middle toolbar. Today, we will go ahead and kick things off with a few reminders. We'll be sending out a registration report of those who are attending this call. So that link will be shown on chat. And if you do ask a question, please state your full name and affiliation so we know who's speaking. And then to kick things off, I believe Jessica will be helping us kick off with the agenda today. Your line is unmuted, Jessica. Go ahead.
Okay. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jessica Stewart, the Senior Energy Meteorologist here at the California ISO. Today, we'll be going over the impacts of the April 8th, 2024 solar eclipse. That includes grid-scale solar, temperature and wind, behind-the-meter solar, and load for the KISO BAA. And we'll also discuss the behind-the-meter and grid-scale impacts and load for the EIM footprint as well. Then Brian will go over some of the real-time operations planning that we're putting together, and then finally a timeline of our additional events that we'll have going on ahead of the eclipse coming up here in a few weeks. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start with a quick overview of the 2023 eclipse impacts, beginning with grid-scale renewables on the left, which saw an impact from about 8:40 to 9:30. We saw quite a large drop-off in grid-scale solar at a rate of about 82 megawatts a minute. We reached our minimum solar generation of 3,200 megawatts at 9:30 in the morning, which is about a 9,600 megawatt decrease from a typical clear sky October day. On the ramp up in grid-scale renewables between 9:30 and 10:20, we saw solar increase at an average of about 131 megawatts a minute. I'll note that after 10:20 a.m., curtailments did play quite a large role in the solar generation actuals that you see here on this slide, with over 5,000 megawatts of solar curtailments in place from approximately 10:50 through 11 a.m. So during this period, solar resources were issued an operating instruction and required to follow their generation, and that helped to assist with controlling a lot of the grid-scale solar during this large on-ramp that we had during that period. On the load side here on the right, this aqua-colored line is the gross load, and the purple line is our net load, which is calculated by the standard load minus wind minus solar. We had about a 2,000 megawatt increase in gross load, followed by about a 5,700 megawatt decrease. And then our net load saw about a 6,000 megawatt increase with an average ramp rate of 100 megawatts a minute, and then followed by a very sharp 12,350 megawatt decrease with an average ramp rate of minus 118 megawatts a minute. So we did see that the ramp down of load for both the load and net load were larger than the ramp ups into the eclipse, and this is due to the timing of the eclipse. It occurred right after our morning load peak, as we were going into our midday minimum. So that means that we had a much larger drop off after the eclipse returned compared to the ramp up that we had going into the eclipse. Next slide, please. So shifting gears and moving on to our upcoming eclipse on Monday, April 8th, we will see impacts across the California state from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. and the Western EIMs from 10 a.m. through 1 p.m. The path here on the right, shown in yellow, shows the path of totality, which will see 100% solar obscuration. This is different from the 2023 eclipse, which had about a maximum of 90% obscuration, as it was an annular eclipse and not a total eclipse. This eclipse will travel from Texas to Maine, so it's also kind of an opposite path. The 2023 eclipse travels from Oregon down to Texas. This one will kind of go in the opposite direction, going from Texas up to Maine. And as I mentioned, this is a total eclipse. So in this, we will see the path of totality, meaning that in the yellow here, the sun will be 100% obscured by the moon compared to the annular eclipse that we had back in October. Next slide, please. So comparing the paths of the eclipse, we've got the 2023 October eclipse on the left and the 2024 April eclipse on the right. I mentioned the 2023 eclipse was annular, meaning that we only saw a 90% maximum solar obscuration, versus here in 2024, we're expected to see 100% obscuration throughout that path of totality. The 2023 eclipse passed over 8 western states from Oregon to Texas, where we have an EIM footprint in all of those states. While the 2024 eclipse will only pass through Texas in terms of EIM footprint states, however, the largest obscuration that an EIM entity will see will be closer to about 85% instead of the 90% that was observed with the 2023 eclipse. So looking at the table at the bottom, even though it's only have been a little over 6 months, we've had quite a bit of growth in both grid scale and behind the meter solar across the CAISO and EIM. CAISO added about 2,000 megawatts of grid scale solar and over 1,400 megawatts of behind the meter solar. And we've also increased our storage resource capacity by a little over 3,200 megawatts. For the EIMs, we added about 2,000 megawatts of solar and over 400 megawatts of behind the meter capacity, plus an additional 270 megawatts of storage resources. Next slide, please.
Jessica, there's a quick question from John.
Oh, sure.
Go ahead, John. Please introduce yourself. Ahmed, can you go ahead? Thank you.
Contractor for the state. I've been curious about looking at the behind the meter response during these events. That's why I'm here, but I want you to know that I can't see any of the slides on the presentation. So if you could, if it's okay if you can't, but if you can, it would be great to be able to get that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. We'll take that back. Right now we can see them and we confirmed. Event producer, can you confirm slides are showing?
I apologize for interrupting. I just couldn't
No,
see
you're
it.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, John. Hopefully you could re-log back in if you can. The slides are posted. I'll send that link out shortly.
Will do. Thank you.
Well, go ahead, Jessica.
Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So this is a map of our grid scale solar regions across California. The percent obscuration is denoted here on the left, sort of in the black Pacific Ocean area, with the different percentages ranging from about 25% obscuration in the northwestern corner of the state down to about 60% obscuration in the far southwest corner of the state the far southeast corner of the state by the deserts. So you can see our desert sites, where we have a lot of our grid scale solar located, will be more heavily impacted by this eclipse due to the path of totality. And then our sites up in the northern tier of the state will be less impacted. This is opposite compared to the 2023 eclipse. In October, we had the path of annularity go more towards the northwestern corner of the state. So we did see a larger impact to our Northern California sites. However, in April, we're expected to see a larger impact in solar generation to our sites further south and to the east due to the proximity of that path of totality. Next slide, please. So taking a look at what we're expected to see in terms of grid scale solar impacts, the blue line here is a clear sky April day. The orange is the eclipse day and the expected impact given a clear sky. And then the green dashed line here is what we observed during the October 2023 eclipse. So impacts will begin around 10 a.m. with solar dropping from around 3,500 megawatts down to a minimum of about 7,123 megawatts at 11:20 when we hit the maximum obscuration across California. This is a decrease of about 79 megawatts a minute over this period. On the eclipse return, we'll see solar generation increase at a rate of 84 megawatts a minute, increasing about 6,700 megawatts to get up to normal production. So this eclipse is occurring a little bit later in the day compared to the October eclipse. During the October eclipse, it started during the on-ramp, so we had an impact during the decrease was a little bit less, and then as the increase came up after the eclipse ended, we saw a much larger ramp up to the midday production. This eclipse is happening pretty much during the entirety of the maximum solar generation of the day. So our decrease in solar and our increase in solar and therefore our ramp rates and during the decrease and increase are pretty similar in magnitude compared to what we had observed back in October. This is a drop of about 7,000 megawatts compared to a clear sky solar day during the eclipse minimum. And then comparing that to a normal April day without the eclipse, the ramp rates during the period are about 3 to 7 megawatts a minute. So we're quite steep in terms of ramp rates compared to the average ramp rate observed in a non-eclipse April day. Compared to the 2023 eclipse, the ramp rate from the start of the eclipse to the maximum impact will be similar to what we observed in October. However, that ramp rate on the eclipse return of about 84 megawatts a minute is about 35% lower than the 2023 eclipse. That was about 131 megawatts a minute up. We're only expected to see about 84 megawatts a minute up, given a clear sky day on the return of this eclipse. Next slide, please. Breaking that down a little bit more into the regional level with the regions I showed a couple slides back. Depending on the location and relative to the path of totality, the eclipses will start at different times for the different regions. It'll start anywhere between 10:05 a.m. for the sites further south and east, all the way as late as 10:16 a.m. for the sites further to the north. We'll peak at about 11:13 to 11:19 a.m. with generation at 32 to 51% of capacity. And then it'll end from 12:18 to 12:33 again, 12:33 p.m. again, ending earlier for the sites that are a bit more further south and east, and then a little bit later for this, a little bit earlier for the sites that are further north and a bit later for the sites that are further south and east. Next slide, please. And then taking a look at the potential temperature and wind impacts. So for this, what we did was we looked at the data from the October eclipse to gain insight into what we could potentially see in April. We didn't see the path of annularity or totality move through, and we were able to do an analysis on the potential obscuration level across the state compared to the observed temperature impact that we had. And because California for this eclipse will see 60% obscuration or less across the entire state, we expect temperature impacts to be pretty minimal, about 3 degrees Fahrenheit or less throughout the eclipse. However, locations closer to the path of totality, such as southeastern New Mexico, could see potential impacts of 6 degrees or more as they're much closer to that path of totality, and we'll see a larger obscuration for a longer duration. For wind, again, we looked at the impacts across California from October. We found that there were minimal impacts overall to wind direction and wind speed compared to a normal October day. And given that in April, we're expected to see less of an obscuration than we did for October, we're not expecting to see any wind impacts to generation across the CAISO footprint with the eclipse coming up in April. And I'll go ahead and pause there to see if there are any questions before I pass it over to load impacts.
So as a reminder, please use the raise hand icon if you have a question. And we also have press #2 if you're just logged in. So I see Sean Hernandez. Ahmed, can you go ahead and unmute Sean? Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Sean.
Yep, can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, Sean from Clean Power Alliance. Very interesting slide earlier. My question is about the curtailment. Was it market optimization or operator decisions that made curtailment play such a big role in the balancing during the ramp up of the 2023 eclipse? And how was that decision made?
I am not sure on that piece. That might be something you could be able to find in the October post-analysis report that we published that would have more details of the October actuals and what we observed there in the market impacts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I will pass it over to Zach, who will go through the load impacts.
Thanks, Jessica. So we simulated the effects of this eclipse by, in this figure here, we pulled all the days from April 2023 and then selected a kind of representative day, and then simulated the effects of the impact of solar on it, and so that is in orange. And then the October 2023 day is up there in green. You can see that right around beginning of 10, we're going to start seeing that 2,800 megawatt increase, ultimately peaking right around 11, followed by the roughly 5,100 megawatt decrease on the way down. In comparison to 2023's eclipse, we're going to see a little bit higher of a up ramp in terms of the total ramp up, about 800 megawatts higher on the way up, and then on the way down, we'll see about 600 megawatts less of total down ramp. So roughly similar in terms of the total magnitude, but just a little bit different in terms of the timing and where those effects are going to be felt. We can head to the next one. So zooming in on this CAISO growth load, we can kind of look a little bit deeper here. This is the same image, just kind of blown up a bit. Looking at the ramp rates, you can see on the way up, we're going to see an average ramp rate of just a little under 50 megawatts per minute. And then on the way down, a little over 50 megawatts per minute. So roughly similar, just a little steeper on the way down. And then same for the max ramp rate that we're expecting to see, 72 megawatts per minute on the way up and a little over, or just around 100 megawatts on the way down. So just a little bit steeper on the way down in comparison to the ramp up period. Can head to the next slide if there's no question. Now looking at CAISO net load, a much larger increase since we're factoring in removing grid scale solar here. An 8,600 megawatt ramp up, followed by an 11,000 megawatt decrease on the way down. Steeper ramp rates, 115 megawatts per minute on the way up and 150 megawatts per minute on the way down. So a little bit steeper on the way down, pretty similar to the gross load. And then the max ramp rate, pretty symmetrical on the way up and down, just under 200 on the way up and just a little over 200 on the way down. We can head to the next slide. Yeah, and I think this shows max ramp rates kind of in a nicer format. Here we have, in blue, we have all the 2023 net load ramp rates. And then in green, we have the 2023 eclipse highlighted. And so you can see that overall, in terms of how fast this is going to ramp in terms of the net load, pretty similar to the 2023 eclipse, a little bit steeper on the way up. It's just under 200 compared to 180 in October. And then on the way down, a little less steep, coming in just over 200 in compared to about 260, 270 in October 2023. But roughly the same magnitude for these ramp rates for net load. So it should be relatively similar to 2023. And we can head to the next slide. So this is a summary here. In terms of large-scale solar for CAISO, a loss of about 6,400 megawatts up until the max, and then followed by an increase of 6,700 megawatts until the end of the eclipse. For gross load, an increase of 2,800 megawatts roughly, until the max, and then followed by a decrease of 5,100 megawatts. And for net load, 8,600 megawatts on the way up, and then followed by a decrease of 1,100 megawatts. And we can head to the next slide, which we'll jump into WEM. So if there's any CAISO questions, we can field them now.
Zach, we have a question. Go ahead,
Wonderful.
TJ Vargas, please introduce yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you go back to slides like 13 or 14? They have similar graphs, but these charts are a little bit confusing. I would think that they should be inverted.
Right. So as the solar BTM and grid scale winds down, then the orange line, the resulting increase, because that generation is not coming on, starts to make it ramp upwards.
Okay, so during the event, that ramp up and ramp down is other generation coming online?
Yes, there would be.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that clarification. You've answered my question.
All right. And so moving on to the WEM impacts, we can head to the next slide. So we've updated this since October, looking at grid scale and approximate BTM solar resources in each region and for each entity. We saw the largest increases of these were generally in the central and desert southwest regions. And so with that and the path of the eclipse, we expect the desert southwest to be mostly receive kind of the largest impacts, and then some entities in the central region as well. We are expecting to see just some of the impacts to be felt there. And we can head to the next slide. So this is a breakdown, just looking at the regional aspect. Overall, it's the impacts from this upcoming eclipse are roughly the same or a little bit decreased in comparison to 2023. You can see that in the non-CAISO California region, and then in the central region, a little less impact. Same with Pacific Northwest, not too large of an impact there. The exception is the desert southwest here. You can see that simulated load increase is a little higher than 2023. So we'll keep an eye on the desert southwest as we move closer to some forecasts to make sure that we're feeling like we have a total, we're looking good on it. And then same with some of the central entities as well. And this is my last slide, so if there's any questions on load forecasting.
We have one question, Julie. Please, you go ahead. Julie, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there going to be additional discussion at this meeting regarding the WEIM, or does that conclude everything related to the WEIM specifically?
That'll conclude the WEM load forecasting.
Okay. During the 2023 forecast, there were RTPD transfers limits that were limited to 0 for all of the WEIM entities after we had gone through a pretty exhaustive process of providing you all the detail for our solar fleet and behind the meter generation. Do you anticipate that behavior will be used again during this solar eclipse? Because I do see in the technical bulletin that you all are requesting some information via city tickets, and I just wonder in what capacity that will be used if in the end our transfers are just going to be shut off.
Hey, Julie, this is Amber. I can take that and I'll pass it over to Brian as well. That information does assist, and I think Brian will cover a slide in a little bit to talk about the market mechanisms that will be used during the eclipse that may help with that question as well. So we'll pass it to that section of the presentation, but if that's not answered during that section, just let us know and we can talk about it a little bit more after we go through the market mechanisms, if that helps.
Can we get Julie back? Or did she lower her hand? We can go to TJ Vargas. I'll confirm her via chat.
Yeah, just curious, since that there's going to be different effects, do you guys have any anticipation on how that's going to affect prices in various areas? Because I know that the October eclipse kind of had impacts on more Southern California.
Yeah, the price impact wouldn't be known at this time. I think when we get to Brian's slides, we'll talk about the pre. So we'll start looking at all of the inputs within a market optimization around the 72-hour RUC time period, and coordinate with the scheduling coordinators for the day-ahead market and the real-time market. But really, those prices will not come out until the day-ahead and real-time timeframes.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Ping. Please be sure to state your affiliation.
Hey everyone, this is Peng from SCE. I just have a question regarding the KAISO load. So given that this coming event is further, the path of totality is further east, so the scenario or the assumption for the magnitude of the adjustment, is it the baseline for a percent obscuration lower than the previous event? That was it last year, October. So are we lowering the magnitude because the path of totality is further east comparing to last event?
Yeah, and those were factored into both the grid scale and the behind the meter. And I want to say, and Jessica, maybe you can jump in if I'm wrong here, but in Southern California, it's about 55% this eclipse, and maybe for last one, I was roughly in that same ballpark. I want to say for Southern California, maybe 45%, or I don't have those exact numbers. I think they're on the previous slide, but yes, it was adjusted for the impacts of this eclipse.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any questions, and I did send the technical bulletin on the link on chat, so those can follow. But I don't see other questions. I think Julie confirmed that she's okay with the response. Great.
And I can just add one last thing as well. We do have a solar eclipse website, and I'll have Brenda put that in the link as well. Within that website, you're able to see all of the materials that went out for the 2023 solar eclipse, in addition to the 2024 solar eclipse. So you can run the comparisons between the numbers of what was forecasted versus actual from the post report, in addition to what's forecasted for this solar eclipse at this time. So I think it is really helpful to have them all there for you guys to look at. We did want to put on the 2023 numbers in these graphs so that you can have an idea of what they were as well, and the overall impact. But there are a lot of overall similarities between them, even though some regions have less impact for this eclipse than others, specifically the Pacific Northwest, because of the trajectory, Northern California. But you do see that, the desert southwest of the WEIM, the central regions, they're very comparable to the 2023 eclipse, and the desert southwest in specific does have a forecasted higher percent change than the 2023 eclipse, just because of the path and where totality is. So I hope that helps. Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Okay, let me just move forward a couple of slides. Oh, just one slide. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Matsunobu, Power Systems Forecaster with the California ISO. Jumping in really briefly here just for this slide. This is the preliminary regulation recommendation numbers that we're releasing. This plot here is basically looking at our April numbers in comparison to what we observed in October for the October eclipse. Big picture here, we're expecting less need for a large regulation adjustment based on the differences in the eclipse impact and lessons learned from October. Just to go through this plot component by component here, focusing on the hourly values first. The solid red line is our draft recommendation for April, and you can compare that to the dotted red line. The adjustment made is in the April 8 eclipse period, which is shaded in this orange and is following, slightly overlapping, but is the more rightward shading compared to the October 14th eclipse, which is shaded in yellow. The blue lines here are 1 minute sample frequency was the regulation value used in October, reg up and reg down used in October. And those values can be compared against the October eclipse regulation hourly values used, which were the very light gray dashed lines. So you can see that we made a large adjustment up, especially in reg up, compared to what the recommendation would have been for a normal October day. And based on the observed behavior and regulation, we do still anticipate adjusting up our recommendation, but not to the same magnitude as we saw in October. It looks like we have a question from Derek.
Discussion, there'll be any talk about the impacts to the natural gas system. I'm with Southern California Gas Company. Just kind of, wanted to get a feel if this event is going to be a similar impact on our system that we saw in 2023, or if it would be larger or less, right? So I don't know if there's a time in this discussion where we're going to cover anything like that.
No, Derek, this is Amber. That's a great question. I think when you look at the overall net load impacts, I don't know if we can go up. I believe it was 1 slide, maybe 2 slides. You see that the net load impacts, especially on the return, the net load ramp down is very similar to the 2023 eclipse. The one difference that we have in the 2024 eclipse, because of the timing of when it happened in the day, is your net load ramp up is slightly steeper in its forecast than it was in the 2023 eclipse. So I think overall you have similarities, but you will notice that the net load ramp up, just because of timing, does have a steeper profile than what was forecasted in actual for 2023.
So does that maybe equate to more burn initially than we saw as the local assets start firing up?
I mean, it's hard to see until we get to that 72-hour out time frame, and I know we'll the gas companies as we get closer. We really need to see that weather forecast too. These are all assuming a clear sky impact as well. So if we do have cloud cover over, that can change it. But you would see an added increase in the ramp in, right? So the net load is increasing more than it did in the 2023 eclipse, just because of timing, where we were in the middle of the day versus the morning hours.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right, and I think if there are no more questions, I'm passing this off to Brian.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hey, Derek, on that gas question too, I would anticipate that the burn rates will be very similar to the past eclipse. a lot of the, when Amber was talking about the net load increase, ramp rates, I think it's important to note that our battery fleet are probably our primary movers on those short duration ramp events such as that. So batteries are typically make up a large percentage of our AS market for reg up, reg down. So just take that for what it's worth, that I think the gas burn info that you had or that you experienced in that past eclipse should be pretty close to what you see on this April 8th event. All right, so sorry, I should have introduced myself first. Brian Murray, Director of Real-Time Operations. Also not on the panelists, but Sherry Pryor, Manager of Market Operations Coordination. She's essentially all the real-time market operators and the day-ahead market operators report up through Sherry, so she's very involved in this planning as well, and she'll be very engaged as we move into the day-ahead timeframes, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. Next slide, please. So just in terms of our market mechanisms and processes that we're using for the solar eclipse, I think first thing I want to do is just, again, thank the short-term forecasting team here at the ISO. They really set us up extremely well last October, way in advance in terms of understanding the impact analysis, calculating what we'll need for our regulation requirements and reserve requirements. And again, they've done a great job here getting us prepared for this event. So we heavily lean and are dependent on their analysis, and from that, now we get into our advanced coordination mode that we're in now, and then I'll talk about the day ahead activities and then the real time. So advanced coordination, I really encourage, I reached out to a lot of the PTOs. I know Sean Grant reached out to our gas supply folks. All this coordination, we really wanted to utilize this stakeholder forum here to get the initial impact assessment out, and then we'll do follow-up meetings for any companies or any areas that would like to dive a little deeper into any of the details. We will have RC West, Tim Beach will be coordinating a number of meetings with our RC West customers in advance, plus the morning of several hours, I think around 0600, if I recall correctly, on April 8th, just to do a bunch of coordination and checking in with the BAs there. So again, relying on this for a lot of our initial outreach, and then we'll do our customer service and external communications. They'll be sending out notices well in advance and daily from once we get to D+7 or April 1st, Monday, April 1st, they'll send out daily messages from that day forward all the way through to the start of the event and then at the end of the event. And I'll cover some of the messaging that they send, just so everybody on this forum has a understanding of what that content will be. So first thing that I want to talk about here is outage coordination. So our operations engineering planning group, obviously they've been made aware of this event months back, and any significant scheduled outages that were targeted for April 8th, either generation or transmission, those outages are attempted to be rescheduled for another time. So we make all of our resources available as much as possible on April 8th. Also, as far as outage coordination goes, test energy. Any test energy schedules that may have been planned for April 8th, those will be rescheduled for another time. So we don't allow any test energy on that date altogether. Outages for generation outages scheduled transmission outages, we're really just trying to avoid the hours of 0800 to 1400. So biggest thing for us in that advanced time frame, going back to that D+7 again, April 1st, the cyber will be open for trade date April 8th, 7 days in advance. So we really encourage all the scheduling coordinators, market participants to be submitting their bids and self-schedules as early as possible, and starting on April 1st. And primarily what we're really focusing on there is the solar resources. We really want to see the bids and self-schedules for our solar resources too, because what we'll do is we'll query that data and compare that to the forecast, specifically with the solar eclipse profile, and identify any outliers. We did find that last October where we had a couple of entities submitting bids and self-schedules that basically defaults, not taking into account the forecast for the eclipse. So by identifying that early, we could do early outreach, get that corrected way before we get to, say, even the D+3 time horizon. So really important that we get those bids and self-schedules 7 days in advance for the solar resources, and then continue to update those as needed as we get closer to the D+1 run. There's a note on there on the advanced coordination about considering declaring restricted maintenance operations. I'll talk about, so RMO or flex, that will be determined based off of the day ahead results that are from the Sunday run on 4/7 for trade date 4/8. So if we have any infeasibilities or anything like that in the day ahead results, then that's when we would make that determination for restricted maintenance. But we did not do RMO or flex, didn't have the need for that last eclipse in October. We're anticipating that will be the case again for April 8th. But again, as we get closer, once we know the system conditions as far as our forced outages, scheduled outages, know our weather, know what the weather forecast is going to be, then we'll continue to analyze that as we move closer to the actual trade date. And if anything changes, we will definitely keep all the stakeholders engaged on that. The day+2 conference bridge, we won't have any day ahead conference bridges unless we have levels, elevated levels of concern. If things go as they did the last event, and we do our coordination and prep work ahead, again, I don't think we'll have a need for those. The RC West will have that bridge established early morning of April 8th, but if something comes up, again, we'll do our outreach to those that we need to involve in discussions if there are any day ahead concerns in terms of those results. The STF group they already talked about the regulation analysis that they've done. So as we get closer to the event date, we'll have a better idea of the forecast, and if we need to make any adjustments to our reserves procurement or AS regulation procurement, we'll do that at that time. Gas supply, I mentioned to Derek, you had that question earlier. I think I've answered that, but we should, when we run, we'll plan on Friday prior to the event, we'll run a 3-day or 72-hour RUC in the day ahead. That will give us our first good look at the resource commitments, as well as any potential congestion on the transmission side. But again, for gas burn rates, I would expect something very similar to last October. Assistance energy transfer. So that is for WEAM entities, and CAISO included, have the option to opt in for assistance energy transfer. The CAISO BA will opt in for trade date 4/8. I would encourage the WIM entities to consider the same. What that allows, for those that may not be aware, is once we're in the real time, if there is a resource sufficiency evaluation test, specifically with flex ramp or bid range capacity, if there's a failure on any 15-minute interval for that upcoming trade hour, the net assistance energy transfer allows for WEIM transfers to increment without being limited, I should say. If there's a failure of the ROC, there can be limitations to the EIM transfers, and with the AET opted in, you're not restricted in that manner. There is a surcharge, though, for any incremental energy on the transfers that's above what the advisory transfers were. Lessons learned from October. We learned a lot of positives from last October. We learned that doing this outreach to all the stakeholders well in advance, again, applauding the STF for their impact analysis, both for the CAISO BA as well as for a lot of the WEIMs. We had a lot of success for CAISO BA. So lessons learned from us, I guess one of the takeaways that we had is in real time, and I'll talk about this a little more when we get into that far right column, but real time we did adjust our AGC control bands to be tighter controlled, and found that that actually hurt us a little bit in terms of the way different resources, different fuel source resources were responding in the rate at what they're responding. So we went back right away to normal AGC control bands, and that worked out very well from us. So from a lesson learned perspective, we have the ability to make AGC tuning adjustments, but planning going into it, we'll just go with our normal parameters there. Now, top day ahead activities, moving to that middle column. So once we get into the day ahead, well, now we're D+7 on into D+1. That time horizon, every day our forecast will get better and better, right? And one thing that we need to consider, and Amber and the STF team are aware of this, is you know, whether or not we want the VER forecast to be on persistence forecast or not. I think last year, Amber, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we planned on turning persistence off if it were a clear day, but if it were a cloudy day, then we would probably leave persistence on. And I think we'll go in with that same game plan again for this event. And WEAM entities also should make that same consideration. And we'll have the opportunity to talk about more details with the WEAM entities in the biweekly operations call that's upcoming. I believe we have one this week or next week. What else do I have? So day ahead, the RUCNet short. Oh, we have basically RUCNet short is essentially a load forecast adjustment, and right now we just base that off of very analytical criteria based off of uncertainties, both load forecast uncertainties and VER production uncertainties. So we won't change, we won't deviate from that. We'll use our standard RUCNet short criteria now for any of those adjustments. I think I've covered about everything else here. Getting into real time, I've talked about the prohibiting test energy. We'll make sure that's coordinated well in advance for any resources that are attempting to schedule for test energy on 4.8. The management of state of charge, you know, the day ahead optimization will optimize our fleet based off of the forecasts and AS requirements. So we anticipate that will do, you know, the outcome of that will be where we need it. But if we need to make any adjustments, we do have the ability in real time for CAISO BA to do whole battery state of charge if needed leading up to the event. So we'll see where the day ahead optimization and commitments, what those results look like, and then real time we'll make that assessment post day ahead. FRP, that's the flexible ramp product. That's a product that's been in production now for a while that obviously will help us on events such as these to help minimize the deltas between what the RTPD, that 15-minute market, looking further into the forecast horizon than the RTD, the 5-minute, and make those true ups there. We've talked about the WEIM transfers. We talked about that with respect to the AET opt-in, but again, just as we encourage to the WEIM entities for the October event, I'd encourage again for this event that we don't impose any out of the ordinary limitations on ETSR transfers. Those limitations being actual limit values or locking ETSRs. The whole intent of the WEIM is to be able to share resources, especially with the variable energy resources. So those transfers, having the transfer capability, having the STUC, the HASP, and the RTD markets, the 4.5 hour out, and then the 15-minute market into the 5-minute market, having those transfer capabilities within the optimization is going to be a benefit to all of us. So really recommend that we don't make any additional limitations there. For CAISO BA, one of our biggest success factors from October was our for resources, especially our solar resources and our batteries, following DOTS, our dispatch operating targets. So that is a big attribute to our success there, and we are going to make sure that we do a lot of outreach in our messaging, reminding resources to follow their DOT. We will be creating operating instruction groups for our solar resources, so that sets the follow DOT flag in ADS. So all that is coming through at the client side, and so they can, plant control systems and scheduling coordinators can see those and follow accordingly. For CAISO BA, we'll have additional staff in the control room in all of our key functions. I think last October we had additional RC, additional gen dispatcher, additional transmission dispatcher, and an additional market operator. And we plan to do the same for this event as well, just for staff augmentation in case more support is needed. And then that ADS, MNS, and Everbridge messaging the day of for real time, we'll be sending constant updates on where we are within the event, reminders about following dispatch operating targets, and messages to our WEIM entities as well as far as how things are going and if there are any market implications they need to be aware of. I think that will cover that. So let me pause there. I'm sure some folks have some questions.
We have Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Go ahead.
Thank you. Kathleen Colbert, Vistra. Can you hear me, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is all really, really, really helpful. I did have one question that you talked about the outage coordination in the advanced period, but I didn't fully grasp what your plan is for those maintenance outages. I know you mentioned it, but and kind of ideally wanting to avoid the certain hours, but can you spend a little bit more time on that? Because we are in the maintenance season, March, April kind of. So I imagine it's pretty prevalent. Can you just walk me through what you think that process would look like?
Yeah, you bet, Kathleen. And thanks for the question. Do need to be more clear on that. So yeah, what the Operation Engineering Planning Group will do is any scheduled outages that are planned to be during the time frame of the solar eclipse. Now, this could be an outage that starts days in advance, but spans through the eclipse period. If any of those outages are what we would deem as significant in terms of resource availability, either from the generation perspective or from the transmission perspective, then our Operation Engineering Planning Group will reach out and see if that outage can be scheduled for a different time. It's not to say that no outages can occur, but we would like to avoid any of the significant impacts to our resources or transmission during that time. If they're just daily outages, for example, then Kathleen knows that would be a good example of something that we would maybe look to schedule later in the day or avoid avoid if at all possible during that solar eclipse period. And honestly, we really need it to be, the eclipse period is roughly from 10 a.m. To 12:40 p.m. But our markets start looking at that time horizon way in advance, right? So that's why throughout the 0800 to 1400 is to kind of put a buffer on both sides. If it were a daily outage, let's just say it was a 4-hour outage and they had it scheduled somewhere right in the middle of that eclipse period, our operations engineering planning group will look to move that to a different time or a different date. Does that help?
Oh, that does help a lot. For the more of the planned outages rather than, is that something that you would expect that the operations engineering group would identify before the 7-day, or is it in that 7-day look ahead time period?
Even before. I mean, definitely scrutiny 7 days in, but as outage schedules are coming in currently, if they're landing on that date and time, then the assessment is done and then potential follow-up if it is needed to be rescheduled.
Thanks, that's super helpful. Thanks,
Sure.
Brian.
Yeah, you bet. Jade, you got a question?
Jade, can you go ahead?
Go ahead.
I can't hear you, Jade. Just try to unmute yourself. Go ahead. I see your mic. Nice. We can hear you. Can you speak louder?
Yeah, I'll give it a try. Sorry about that. Can you guys, thanks for this meeting. This is really great. My name is Jade. I'm over at PG&E right now. So I was wondering if you could say anything else about the, you said operating instruction groups will be created for that day of. And I'm just wondering what else you'd be able to say about that, what that might look like.
Sure. Yeah, Jay, thanks for the question. So OI groups is essentially a tool within the market that the CAISO BA gen dispatchers can utilize that it allows them to send an operating instruction to follow DOT to a group of resources versus having to do one by one individually. So it's basically a tool for efficiency, but essentially all the solar resources can be defined in a market, in a group within the market. The gen dispatchers can send that flag out to ensure that they have the follow DOT flag set in ADS.
Okay, sure. So do you have any insight as to what sort of criteria they might build a group off of? So if I manage a few dozen different solar sites that may be impacted or may need to follow a DOT, would they be able to isolate, me as a scheduling coordinator? Would that be a criteria that would that could be created, or is it?
Yeah. So Jade, we do have different groups for those efficiencies if the gen dispatchers need, but for this solar event, it's going to be every single solar resource participating in our market that will receive that instruction. So this group is basically a blast to all of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's great.
Yep.
Cool. That helps a lot. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Dennis, go ahead. You're next.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you, Dennis.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Dennis System at Northern California Power Agency. This is regarding the previous question, Brian, regarding outages, planned outages that have already been approved for the month of April. So we have a large combined cycle natural gas plant that's already approved and scheduled for our annual maintenance next month. We plan on starting the outage even a couple of days before April 1st. Once it's out, it'll be very difficult for us to if you called us and say you need this plant back, it'd be very difficult for us to bring it back by April 8th. You mentioned you'll look at significant outages. What would you consider significant? Is it the resource fuel, the plant size, or what? It'd be good to get an idea of what the chances are that we would get a call from your gen dispatcher to cancel this outage.
Yeah, Dennis, I think it's really I know significant is gray area. It's really going to be, kind of locational dependent, but also, because this solar eclipse impacts more of the southern part of the state, right, than the northern part versus the October eclipse that was more of an impact to the north than the south. So if your outage is already being approved, I wouldn't have any concern. That assessment's already been done. Again, the Operation Engineering Planning Group had this heads up months ago. So I wouldn't concern yourself about us reaching out now and asking you to move that to another time. But the engineers will look at the whole, the combination of, it's really the combination of potential outages and knowing where our highest impact's going to be with the solar event. So that's probably why yours was approved and didn't have any major impact concerns.
Great. Thanks a lot, Brian.
Yeah, you bet. All right, any other questions before we move on?
Hey, Brian, do you see the chat on your screen for WebEx?
Oh, the WebEx on the...
Oh, okay, no, just making sure. Okay, you're good. You're good to proceed.
Okay. Let's go ahead and advance. I think the next slide really just kind of breaks out the different coordination. I think I've already talked to this. So go ahead and advance another slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the messaging, kind of the samples of what will be sent, starting with the day +7 on into the real-time trade date. One thing that I'll note on here is, I was reading actually, I think okay, we're good. I think on previous messages, we considered putting in the actual ramp rates and stuff like that. We didn't want to be that granular just based off of not knowing that forecast information up until we're closer to the actual event. But anyways, so the M&S messages, that top message, pre-eclipse message, I believe one has already kind of gone out, but these will be sent out daily as reminders from 4/1 on out. And then you'll see the follow dots, and each of those messages, they'll be going out as reminders on the market notification system. One more slide, please.
We do have one question, chat, related
Sure.
to, it states, do you have any guidance on the state of charge battery operators and what to target into the 4/8/24 operating day?
Yeah, so again, number one, we'll be waiting for the day ahead results to come out so we can see because a number of the batteries will probably have ancillary service awards. So we'll see what those results are, both from a commitment standpoint and for AS. And then what we'll also look at we'll look at our capacity and ramp capability for the impact hours of the solar eclipse, and if we, because the day ahead is an hourly commitment, right? So obviously intra-hour, there's a lot of movement intra-hour. So if we feel like there is a need to better position the resources for ramp capability, then what our operators will do is they can issue EDs for those batteries that don't have AS awards to be at a minimum state of charge. I think last October we did do a number of the EDs for batteries that didn't have AS to have a 60% state of charge going into the start of the Eclipse event. So again, we'll have to wait for the day ahead results to verify that, but that's a tool that we have in real time if needed. Does that answer that question?
Thank you. Yeah, that was a short question. And we do have one more person. And Tim said thank you. The next person, TJ, go ahead.
Yes, hi. Sorry, this might be a silly question, but what does the SNS stand for in the SNS messaging?
MNS, is that what you're asking, TJ? I think that's what you're at. MNS is Market Notification System. So that will, MNS messages will show up on the Market Participant Portal and Oasis.
Yeah, sorry, I got muted. That's what I was at. So market notice or market notification system. Okay.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, I think that's all that I had in terms of presenting and sharing. So if there are no other questions, I'll kick it back to Brenda.
Thank you so much, Brian. And we're going to go ahead and just go on the next timeline. Yeah, I have Amber.
Yeah, I'll talk to timeline a little bit. This is Amber. So I know Brian and others mentioned as we were going through the presentation, we do have IOU coordination discussions scheduled for this week, March 12th, as well as the WEIM biweekly operational meeting on March 13th. And then there are 3 scheduled RC West coordination meetings for the RC footprint, March 19th, April 1st, as well as April 5th. And then the TOPBA RC West coordination on April 8th. So those are the different pieces that are moving as we continue to prepare for the solar eclipse. We are offering an opportunity for stakeholders to comment or submit any questions that they may have in relation to the presentation today, up until I believe March 25th, 2 weeks from now. So we can take those into consideration. Hope that we answered most of your guys' questions as they were coming through today. But if not, feel free to ping us, and we're happy to elaborate on anything as you guys also prepare for the eclipse, whether you be stakeholder, the gas company, etc. Just let us know what additional information that you guys may need. With that, I'll pass it back to Brenda.
Thank you, Amber. So for us, a reminder, we did send out some links on chat. Various ones include the previous October eclipse, and also I just added the one in August of 2017. But there's also a webpage that CAISO has built out, and it includes historical information as well as like resources where NASA also adds a little bit of the eclipse there. So we added that link on CAISO from communications team. Feel free to ask any questions, send them over to ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and we'll route those to our subject matter experts, managers, and directors. We also have information listed on the miscellaneous stakeholder meetings under current meetings, and I did send that chat for the presentation today. As for a reminder, we do have a save a date for the new resource implementation fair. It's a hybrid new resource implementation stakeholder meeting that will be held on Wednesday, May 1st. This meeting will include a few things that we did in the past with the interconnections fair, and this meeting will kind of focus on more new resources. So Kelsey is leading this with a few folks in our team, but more details to come on a notice also for the in-person registration. The next one is to save the date for the 2024 Stakeholder Symposium on October 29th and 30th. We have a welcome reception on the 29th, followed by the next day will be a Stakeholder Symposium for one whole day. And this will have a notice coming out pretty soon in the next few months with registration, sponsorship opportunities. And we do have any Any interested people, we also have a sponsorship opportunity for that day too. And so for that, any questions, send them over to symposiumreg@kaiso.com, but we'll have that registration out soon. So that way we can get everyone ready for that event coming up. And then that would be the last slide for this meeting, but we thank so much for everyone. We peaked about 160 people attendees, so that was great. This recording will be posted shortly later this week on Friday, if not Monday. So we will send that link out and post it on the miscellaneous webpage as well as the Solar Eclipse KAISO website. But other than that, I'll send it back to Ahmed to please close this call, and thanks everyone for participating.